Have you ever looked at your life and thought, why do I keep ending up here? Different relationships, same problems, different opportunities, same fear. You tell yourself you're not going to overthink this time. You're not going to people please. You're not going to shut down. You're not going to keep trying to control everything. You're not going to settle. You're not going to keep talking to yourself like that. And somehow you find yourself doing it again. And I don't think that's always because you don't want to change. Sometimes we're trying to change the behavior without ever identifying the belief underneath it. And that's what I want to talk about today, because this is really the heart behind soul formation. I believe a lot of us are living in cycles, and growth isn't always linear. Sometimes we make progress in an area, and then something happens that reveals, oh, there's still something here. There's still fear here. There's still rejection here. There's still insecurity here. There's still something I'm trying to control. There's still a belief underneath the way I'm responding. And if we're willing to become aware of those things, not to condemn ourselves for them, not to hide from them, not to blame everyone else for them, but actually acknowledge them, God can begin transforming them. Because here's one of the principles that shapes everything I teach. Transformation begins with awareness. So where do these cycles even come from? A lot of them started before we even realize they're there. Childhood, family dynamics, life experiences, trauma, relationships, culture, society, things that people said to us, things that people did to us, things that happened around us, and sometimes things that should have happened but didn't. But here's what I want you to understand. The experience isn't necessarily the belief, but we experience something and then we make a meaning out of it. Someone leaves and the belief becomes, people always leave me. You're rejected and the belief becomes, something must be wrong with me. You grow up around financial instability and the belief becomes, there's never going to be enough. People continually disappoint you and the belief becomes, I can only depend on myself. You experience instability and the belief becomes, if I'm not in control, something bad is going to happen. And eventually those beliefs can become so familiar, we stop recognizing them as beliefs and they just feel like the truth. And this is where the cycle starts showing up in our everyday lives, because we don't just carry beliefs, we live from them. They affect our mindset, they affect our relationships, they affect our decisions, and eventually they can affect the direction of our lives. Think about it. If somewhere along the way I developed the belief that I'm not enough, what kind of thoughts might come from that? Maybe I constantly compare myself to other people. Maybe I'm extremely critical of myself. Maybe I struggle to celebrate what I've accomplished. Maybe I constantly feel behind. Maybe I believe I have to prove myself. And now that beliefs enter into my relationships. Maybe I need constant reassurance. Maybe I become a people pleaser. Maybe I'm terrified of disappointing people. Maybe I don't set boundaries because I'm afraid that somebody will leave. And maybe I tolerate things I shouldn't tolerate because being mistreated feels less frightening than being alone. And then that same belief starts affecting my decisions. I don't apply, I don't start, I don't speak up, I don't leave, I don't say no, I don't obey what God is asking me to do because I'm afraid I'm going to fail. And suddenly, a belief that was formed years ago is now influencing the direction of my life today. That's why I always say your problem isn't always the decision. Sometimes it's the belief that's driving the decision. And here's where I think we have to give ourselves enough space to really examine this, because some of these behaviors developed for a reason. Control may have made you feel safe. People pleasing may have helped you feel accepted. Hyper independence may have protected you from disappointment. Emotional walls may have protected you from getting hurt again. Perfectionism may have helped you receive praise or avoid criticism. So I'm not interested in just telling somebody, stop doing that. Because my question is, why are you doing that? What are you protecting? What are you afraid would happen if you stopped? What do you believe you need that behavior to provide for you? Because if we only change the behavior without addressing the belief underneath, we may just find another behavior to protect the same wound. And this is personal for me. I grew up without my parents. For a long time, I could tell you the facts of my story. I could tell you what happened. I could tell you who raised me. I could tell you what I experienced. But knowing what happened to you and understanding how it shaped you are two different things. There were things I learned through my childhood, ways I learned to survive, ways I learned to think, ways I learned to relate to people. And as I got older, those things didn't just disappear because I became an adult. They came with me into my relationships, into my marriage, into motherhood, into work, in the way I saw myself, in the way I made decisions, and even into my relationship with God. And over time, through my relationship with God, through marriage, through becoming a mother, through therapy, through leaving real estate and stepping into what God was calling me to build, I started recognizing something. There were beliefs underneath some of my decisions. There were things I thought were that's just how I am. And God started showing me, no, that's not how you are. That's what you learn to survive. That's how you learn to protect yourself. But that doesn't mean that's who I created you to be. And that distinction changed so much for me because now I could stop asking what's wrong with me and start asking what's driving me. That's one of the biggest principles behind Soulformation. We don't always respond to what's happening. We respond through what we've come to believe about what's happening. And the longer we live by an unexamined belief, the more normal it feels. That's why awareness matters. You can't take responsibility for something you haven't recognized. You can't release something that you haven't identified. And you can't intentionally align your life with God's truth if you don't recognize what you've been aligning it with instead. And this isn't just something that we've seen in modern psychology or culture. We see cycles throughout scripture. One of the clearest examples to me is the Israelites. God delivers them from Egypt. They literally witness the faithfulness and power of God. He provides, He leads, He protects, He makes a way. And yet, when circumstances become difficult, fear comes back, complaining comes back, unbelief comes back. They start longing for what's familiar. At different points, they even wanted to go back to Egypt. To think about that. God brought them out, but they still had to learn how to trust Him while moving forward. And I think that's such a picture of what happens with us today. Sometimes God has already brought you out of something physically, but you're still learning how to stop living like you're there mentally. You're not in childhood anymore, but you're still protecting yourself like that child had to. You're not in that relationship anymore, but you're still treating new people like they're the person who hurt you. You're not in a financial situation anymore, but you're still living from scarcity. You're not who you used to be, but sometimes you're still making decisions from the beliefs that you developed when you were there. That's why transformation requires more than just changing your circumstances. Romans 12:2 tells us, do not conform to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. I love the connection there. Transformation, renewing your mind, because God isn't only concerned with changing what we're doing, He cares about what's happening within us. What do you believe? What are you thinking? What is shaping the way that you see yourself? What is shaping the way that you see other people? And what is shaping the way that you see Him? And does it agree with His truth? Because some of us have been allowing experiences to have the final word over things God has already spoken about. Rejection says you're unwanted. God says you're chosen. Abandonment says you're alone. But God says He will never leave nor forsake you. Scarcity says there won't be enough. God says He knows what you need. Shame says your mistakes define you. The gospel says there is redemption. Fear says protect yourself, control everything. Don't move until you know exactly how it's going to work out. And God says to trust me. And control is a big one because many of us know that we're meant for more. We feel like God has put something in us, a calling, an idea, something we're supposed to build, a conversation we're supposed to have, a step we're supposed to take, but we keep waiting until we figure out exactly how it's supposed to happen. We want the whole plan, we want the whole outcome, we want confirmation that it's going to work, and we want to know that we're not going to fail. We want to know we're not going to look foolish. And sometimes what we call waiting for clarity is really fear. Sometimes it's control, sometimes it's unbelief. Because if I only obey God when I can see how everything is going to work out, am I actually trusting Him? There are things that God will call us to that are beyond our natural ability. I believe that there's a purpose in that because if I could accomplish everything God called me to do entirely by myself, why would I need Him? Dependence on God isn't a flaw in the plan. Dependence on God is part of the plan. Because through that dependence, I learn His character, I learn His faithfulness, I learn surrender, I learn obedience, I learn humility, I learn trust, and ultimately I become more like Christ. And that's really the goal. Not just success, not just healing, not just having better relationships, not building a business, not just discovering your purpose, but Christlikeness. Who am I becoming? As a wife, am I reflecting Christ? As a mother, am I reflecting Christ? As a friend, am I reflecting Christ? as a sister, as a leader, as an entrepreneur, in my business, in my relationships, in the way I respond when I'm hurt, in the middle of conflict, in the way I forgive, in the way I steward what God gives me. Who am I becoming? Because God's purpose for my life isn't separate from the formation of my character. What He's doing for me and in me are connected. So, what exactly is soul formation? Soul formation is the process of becoming aware of what's shaping you, taking responsibility for what you do with it, releasing what no longer agrees with God's truth, and intentionally aligning the way that you think, relate, decide, and live with who God created you to be. It's not about pretending your childhood didn't affect you. It's not about blaming everything on your childhood either. It's not about pretending you weren't hurt. It's not about blaming every decision on trauma. And it's definitely not trying to fix yourself without God. It's about being willing to get honest. What's driving me? Why do I think the way that I do? Why do I keep responding like this? What did I learn from that experience? What have I come to believe? How is that belief affecting my life now? And does that belief agree with what God says is true? That's where the soul formation cycle comes in. Awareness. I have to see it. Responsibility. Now that I see it, what am I going to do with it? Not whose fault is this, but what is my responsibility now? And then release. What belief, behavior, offense, expectation, identity, or coping mechanism am I holding on to that God is asking me to surrender? And then alignment. What does God say? What is actually true? What would it look like for my beliefs, thoughts, relationships, and decisions to agree with the truth? And then action. What do I actually need to do? Have the conversation, set the boundary, apply, apologize, forgive, ask for help, stop, start, wait, move, obey, and then integration. I practice it, I live it, I keep choosing it until what God is teaching me isn't just something that I highlighted in my Bible, it's become part of how I live. And then we keep growing because growth isn't linear. God continues revealing, we continue surrendering, we continue to renew our minds, and we continue becoming. So I want to leave you with a few questions. Not questions for you to answer for me, but questions for you to sit with and with God. What cycle keeps repeating in my life? Where do I keep saying, why does this keep happening? What do I believe underneath that pattern? Where did I first learn that? Did someone teach it to me? Did an experience teach it to me? Did fear teach it to me? Did the culture teach it to me? And then ask, is that actually true? Not, does it feel true? Not, have I believed it for a long time, but is it true? And most importantly, is this what God is saying? Then ask yourself, what am I protecting? What am I afraid will happen if I believe differently? And what might change in my life if I actually start living from God's truth instead? So here's what I want you to do this week. Just one thing. Write down one belief you've been living from. Not 10, just one. Maybe it's, I'm not enough. People always leave. I can't trust anyone. I have to do everything by myself. There's never enough. If I don't control it, everything will fall apart. I'm too far behind. I always mess things up. Write that belief down. And underneath it, what does God say is true? Find a scripture that speaks directly to that belief, not just a motivational quote, not just something that makes you feel better, but truth. And start bringing that belief before God, because you may have repeated the old belief thousands of times. Renewing your mind means intentionally learning to agree with the truth. Ultimately, soul formation isn't about becoming the person the world tells you to be. It's about becoming more Christ-like and becoming who God created you to be, in the way that we think, in the way that we love, in the way that we communicate, the way that we forgive, the way that we lead, the way that we parent, the way that we build, the way that we serve, the way that we make decisions. Everything we do and everything that we are can reflect Him. And maybe you've recognized cycles in your family that have existed for generations. Maybe you recognize some in yourself. You don't have to pretend they're not there. And you don't have to stay there just because that's what you always known. You can decide, this cycle ends with me, not because you're going to fix generations of dysfunction through your own strength, but because you're willing to bring it into the light. Bring it before God. Take responsibility for what belongs to you and allow Him to teach you a different way. Sometimes changing the cycle starts with one person willing to say, it ends with me. And that's what we're going to talk about on this channel. We're going to have real faith-based conversations about mindset, relationships, childhood, identity, healing, spiritual growth, and purpose. We're going to talk about abandonment, rejection, trust, control, people-pleasing, fear, scarcity, survival mode, relationships, calling, decision making. And we're not just going to talk about what you're experiencing, we're going to ask, what's underneath it? What does it look like? Why does it happen? What belief might be driving it? How is that belief affecting your life? What does God's word say about it? What does transformation actually look like? So if you ever thought, I know God created me for more, but I'm not sure how to get there from where I am to where He's calling me, you're in the right place. Subscribe to this channel and walk this journey with me. And if you're ready to start doing the work now, I created the Soulformation Guide to help you uncover the beliefs driving your thoughts, relationships, and decisions so you can begin renewing your mind with God's truth and making intentional decisions aligned with where He's leading you. You can download the guide using the link in the description. And when you're finished here, watch the next video in this series because we're going to start identifying some of these cycles one by one. Remember, transformation begins with awareness. I'll see you in the next video.